I've been asked to give my memories of World War II and especially the Battle of the Bulge. And I got there into Europe after the Bulge had really begun, and we were sent over for the need of infantrymen. I was sent over not as a division, but as a I'll think of it in a minute. It was what would be called today a brigade, because we had a brigade general, a brigadier general, who was assistant division commander, who was in lead of the what we called the Land Task Force Linden. So back in those days, it wasn't a brigade, it was a task force that involved 3 different infantry regiments. We were all trained and expected to go as a division of the Rainbow Division, which made quite a nice name for itself during World War I. And we felt kind of proud of the Rainbow Division. But what happened was there must have been very difficult transportation problems at that time. I think this German U-boat had really messed up our transportation facilities, so we couldn't get all of the division over there. So we just went as an infantry regiment, and as 3 infantry regiments, and the division followed up later with signal corps and artillery and all the rest of the things that go with a division. But we were just attached to other divisions already in the line. We first went in on Christmas Eve along the Rhine River near Strasbourg. And the division we replaced was the 36th Division. They pulled out, we went in, and that was where we spent Christmas Eve. But we had no knowledge of couldn't even see across the river to any action, but we could hear some noises over there. But we didn't spend long there because they needed us. We finally found out there'd been a big trouble with the Bulge up in the Bastogne area, but that was a whole different army. So they needed help as infantrymen. They loaded us into what was called alligators at that time, which held about 12 or 15 men, could go across the rivers if necessary, and also up and down the roads. And they moved us to different areas where the routine, or where we were expected to meet some tank attacks. And I remember we were just landing in one area, and they'd say, "Okay, dig in, the tanks are going to come from that direction." So we'd start digging with those little dinky entrenching tools that were no good over in a frost. The frost was about 6 or 8 inches. And we'd hammer with those dinky tools for a while, and finally, in 2 days, they moved us 5 times. And each time they would say, "Dig in." The last few times we didn't do much digging. We unless the artillery was coming in, then we could dig like crazy. But I'm getting bogged down here. Mainly our job during that time, we were moved further north as a relief force for the 79th Division. And then we were taken away from the 79th and put up into the 6th Army for a while. Then we were even taken out of the 6th Army and put into the 3rd Army with Patton's troops for a while. And we were constantly moving, and it was a bad time when we finally got settled into a little village down in Alsace, Lorraine. And we thought we were going to catch our breath for a while, and instead, it was on January 9th, the German army made the last push on the Western Front, and they hit us with SS and tanks that they'd pulled out of Russia, and hit us at a time that we were without defense, because the day before, this is snafu par excellence. The day before, they took up our bazookas. They were going to perform a modification on the bazooka. So we had no bazookas. So when the Tiger tanks hit us, my platoon had we'd gone into a defensive position in a cemetery outside of a little town called Hatton. And this cemetery had a wall of about 3 or 4 feet high, so we had some good protection there. And we hadn't been in that place very long until we heard some shooting from one of the squad that was watching our rear, and a German patrol was coming in. And it was about 3 in the morning, dark, but they were wearing the white capes, and they hit the ground after the shooting started. Harry Gould's squad was on that side, and you could see the lumps out on the snow, so they were really not hidden, and Harry's squad shot them up pretty good. And they were moaning, groaning, but we didn't try to bring them in until daylight. It was dark, and they were out there, lying there on that snow. And finally motioned for them to come in. It drew a little more light. And as they came in, with the hands up or over their head, I noticed one guy. He was coming in like this, and I motioned for him I thought he might have a grenade hidden. Motioned for him to get his hand up, and he pulled a finger out of a hole in his neck. I'll get on with it. Anyway, we got as those guys walked in, that was a signal to the tanks where we were, and so they started shelling us in this cemetery. And we not only had to worry about, these were 88s. The Tiger tank was equipped with an 88, which was the best artillery piece in the war. And they were hitting these cemetery markers, and not only was the shrapnel flying, but the granite from all those. And I had my BAR man took a big chunk out of his arm, and we found out it was this granite, not the shrapnel. But anyway, he had, since he was hurt, he took the prisoners back to the rear, to the aid station. And there were 3 of them couldn't get up, and so there was about 5 that still could walk and carry of that patrol. And the patrol was led by an Oriental, and I don't know whether he was Japanese or Chinese or what, but of course Harry Gould took the P-38 that he was carrying. That was good trading material when you got to the rear. P-38s or Colts or whatever. And anyway, I'm slow. I ought to get on with this. The upshot of it was the Tigers came after us, and by that time the messenger had come to pull back and protect the CP and hold at all costs. that was back in the village about a half a mile away from us. So we pulled back out of the cemetery back to that house, and it had a nice coping around it, about 2 foot high. It gave us some protection. We scattered around back of that. And the tanks came, and my assistant squad leader had a grenade. It was a fragmentation grenade, no good for tanks, but we had to do something. He had some anti-tank launcher, he had a grenade launcher on his rifle. So he took a shot at that tank. Back in that village, there was a railroad track, and we had been taught if you can get to the underside of the tank, it was the least protected. So when the tank came up over the railroad, Toto took a shot at it, but I don't know whether in the heat of things he forgot to pull the safety pin out of the grenade or whether he had a bad shot, but it bounced off, nothing detonated. And he took another one, and same thing, bounced off, no detonation. Then the tanks moved right in on us. They had 30 caliber machine gun on one corner, and then they raking us pretty good with that, but we had that coping to keep under. But then after a few minutes, the rest of us were shooting at the slits for the driver of the tank, shutting it, trying to mess up his vision. But after they found out they couldn't move us with the machine gun, then they surprised us. They came down with a flamethrower. And the flamethrower, he started right down that coping we were behind. And I couldn't see any reason to stay there and turn to barbecue, so I yelled at the guys, we pulled up and we ran. We disobeyed the order, hold at all costs, but we couldn't stop that tank with rifles. That wouldn't do any good. So anyway, we ran. We ran for about a mile, and I remembered from previous recon patrols I'd been on that G Company, a 2nd Battalion, was on our right flank. So we ran in that direction. Finally, after about a mile over open ground and some artillery shells, we finally came to see some GIs, and they were G Company. And they had bazookas. And so we joined up with them, and we made a fight of it. And they had a good position on the brow of a hill with the bush, and that bazooka team had selected good. And it wasn't long till the tanks pulled out of the woods in that position, and but the bazooka team got 2 tanks out of them, and then I had to run around the other side of the house because the tanks were followed by infantry, and it was time to do some shooting for those guys. So that was our worst time we'd ever had in the war, and never got that bad again. The battalion lost 2/3 of the men. Charlie Company was hit, Baker Company was hit, and so they took a lot of prisoners. But we ended up, after 3 days, we had 1/3 of the battalion, and they pulled us out of the line. Finally, we were relieved. And we went back, and then we did nothing but patrolling for a while. But the battalion was not enough left. They put all the battalion together and called it X Company, and we just did patrolling for a while. And then after they found out we were no longer we were no longer a fighting force that mounted anything, so they pulled us out of the line, and we went back to the rear to get in some replacements. I finally got off the line. They told me, well, Tweed, you can get battlefield commission if you want it. And they told me that means 10 days off the line. Nobody's going to be shooting at me. I'm going to get hot meals. I'm going to have a warm bed. So I took it, and that's 10 days off the line back in Théon, France. And when I was returned to the battalion, I was sent to Dog Company instead of Baker Company, which I'd come out of, because Dog Company was the heavy weapons company, and I'd had machine gun training back when I was in an anti-aircraft outfit, or my first outfit when I went to the service. So I had a machine gun platoon from then on until the war was over. And we never again had as terrible a siege as we did during that one period. And soon when we did get back on the line, they said, well, we're going to jump off, go into the attack position on the Ides of March. I always remember the Ides of March because I always recall my Latin teacher and my Caesar's greeting for the Ides of March. Anyway, in the Ides of March, they said, well, your battalion needs to go in reserve because we don't know how they're going to perform. They're all untried. But our general was smart enough to say, we're not going to go down the roads where they've got all the defenses built up. We're going to go over these mountains. So they had the Siegfried line had taken good positions in this mountainous area. I'm trying to think of the name of I can't think of the name of that mountain range now. But anyway, we did get through the Siegfried line in pretty good shape because we went over the mountains where they had not defended very well. There was a lot of uphill and down. We even gave us mules. We had two boys from the company went back to handle the mules, and they brought our ammunition and our food and stuff with the mule train, and you could hear those mules woo all over the mountains. Anyway, when we got to these minefields, that we knew we were going to hit the minefields. Fortunately, they were mainly held by old guys and wounded vets and people that were eager to give up. And ahead of us, the other regiment had gone in and laid down tape for us to go through those minefields, and that was a shock to me too. Was that the first guys that had to run through those minefields, rolling out the tape for the rest of us, they had to pay the price. And I saw two and a half truckloads of GI bodies, and they hauled them to the rear, and I often wondered if heroes ever got rewarded. Those guys probably nobody ever knew about them. There were arms sticking out of these trucks and legs, and fortunately for us, the lines were down. We went through the minefields, and from then on, we didn't meet any real resistance. When we did, the 20th Armor had come up. They had just arrived there, and I think they were afraid the war was going to be over before they could create a wonderful record for themselves. So we were fortunate enough to, when we'd meet some resistance, we could just call in a tank or tank destroyer, and they'd lob some artillery into that church steeple or wherever, and that would be some guy would come out eager to surrender with a white flag or something. And from then on, the balance of the war, it was never like it was for that 3-day period we had. It was January 9th when they struck us. I'll never forget the date. It was January 9th. But I guess that's enough. There's a lot of the things. We ended up down at the Munich was on our schedule. We went through Würzburg, Munich, and and we were expecting to go to Berchtesgaden. They told us there'd probably be a last-ditch stand there by the Hitler and his gang, but finally we got close to the Austrian border, and by that time they told us we could stop shooting, look out for Kesselring's army was coming up out of Italy, and I wasn't there at the time, but so I talked to some guys that said Kesselring's army came up. They had to cross a bridge over, I forget which stream. They had them throw their weapons on one side and their ammunition on the other side of the bridge. And they said after a short length of time, the weapons had piled up so high the water had stopped running in this river. So they had to get the tank dozers down there to run over all those rifles and stuff and flatten it out so the water could go again. So anyway, that was a story he told me. And then we just got involved after that into army occupation duties, which meant running through a camp of displaced persons and trying to get them back home and so forth. Well, in this displaced persons camp, I was in charge of it after a while. It was down in the little town of Saalfeld in Austria, and it was full of Yugoslavian people. And I didn't have any background for what was going on with the Yugoslavian background, and I knew nothing about the tribal jealousies or anything. So anyway, there was over 1,000 of the Yugoslavians down there in this camp, and I had to go get supplies. And this area, I was in Salzburg, was the nearest big town, so I had to go to Salzburg, and in the ration board, which is still intact in Salzburg, the civilian ration board, is where I met my future wife, and I had to go back there as often as I could manage. And after the war was over, we kept communication with letters, and after about a year, I decided this was for real, and she did too, and so she came over as a war bride just before. I remember I was pushed a little bit because the end of the there was a war bride could come in without going through the entire 10 years or 7 years or whatever it was for citizenship. I forget what it was, but if you came in at a certain period of time, which I was right up to that date, it was going to be, if I didn't get off my tail and get busy. And I remember I called the local representative in my hometown, and he called Senator Bricker, because I only had 3 days left that she could get come in and get citizenship without going through the lengthy 5-year wait or whatever it was. I'm not making much sense with all this probably, but anyway, that's how I met my wife, and she came over here, and she taught here at Edison State, taught German and English for a while, and so that's brought the end of my war record, maybe. My company commander was kind of a humorous type, and when we went back to take on our refills and train them, we were back there for 10 days in this little town of Amélie-Court, France. And the captains, we went into the billets of the people who lived there, and where we went in, there's a little old lady there. She must have been ancient because she was bent over, she had no teeth. But every time, it was February with mud every place. So every time we would come back in the house, she would raise hell with us in French. We knew nothing of what she was saying, but she did say she would take a little, I guess the captain talked her into learning a little English. So, so all the guys in the company began to pick up on this, and they all went along with it. So he told her that bonjour in French was in English. And every time anybody would see her, they'd say, and she'd say, so we are having a great time with this, although I'm sure, I don't know whether you want this kind of talk, but it even went farther than of course, got into the even worse language. But when we were still back there training, and the Red Cross donut truck came in, and there were two young ladies on the donut truck pushing coffee and donuts. And it was cold that day, and the captain said, well, come into the CP and warm up. And those ladies came into the CP, so Mama wanted to show her English. And after they'd come in, she said, so there were other words, and I can't remember all of it now. And maybe you may have to edit this out, I don't know. But it brought some fun to our whole company. We picked up on that thing, and back in that little village, there was no water supply to different homes. You just had a central water supply, artesian well in the center of town with a big watering trough. So every time she would go down with her bucket to get fresh water every day, she would pass a bunch of GIs, and everybody loved to give her the treatment, and she'd respond. It buoyed us all up. We had fun with that. But that didn't last long. We had to get back and fight. That was fortunately never as bad as it was in January. And the weather was better. It wasn't as cold. We didn't have to fight the frozen ground. And all we had to do was hunt something to eat and try to keep out of the artillery from then on. And so I'll bring that to a close. Maybe that's a good place to stop.